Felix did come a close second on the tweet competition, but I had to win. So yeah, as Felix mentioned, my name's Joe Wilkins. I'm here representing Reserva, the Youth Land Trust. Some of you may have heard of us. I will go a little bit in depth what we actually do. But basically, we work to empower young people to be active parts of conservation, through storytelling, not just as voices, but as how do we actually get young people involved? And as it says, how do we move beyond the kids' table? And I was fortunate enough to be at COP last week. It was a very tiring week, but something I realized was young people are still used as sort of cheerleaders on the side of it. They're not, when they say we've included youth, it's quite often they're just there. We don't actually have a part to say, we don't get a vote. So what I'm really keen on is how do we bridge that gap then, that young people actually can be a part of the conversation and are treated as equals in the discussion. So hopefully as we go through this presentation, and I'm around all day, and I'd love to chat to more of you who I know are involved in youth governance in different ways. So but yeah, just a little bit about me. I'm the Conventions and Policy Officer at Reserva Youth Land Trust, so my job is basically COP26 and other COPs, so it was a manic few days. My background is ecology, first and foremost. I did it on tipping points and whether we could find sort of general indicators that an ecosystem was approaching a tipping point, which was harder said than done. And then, as Felix mentioned, my master's was in Aberystwyth, looking at environmental governance and how we can actually get young people involved. So you're probably going to see some slides from my actual dissertation, and I love a glossary, so you're probably going to get bored of that as well. But yeah, so we'll just kick off. So governance, I think, is a word that's thrown around quite a lot. I think a lot of people, know what government is, but I think we really need to be sure of what the word governance means. And if anyone is looking for a really good book series, they're called A Very Short Introductions, and they are excellent. I'm currently reading one on neoliberalism, so if anyone's interested, they are excellent. They span from like classical civilization through to modern economics. So this definition is actually taken directly from there. So its governance comprises all of the processes of governing, whether undertaken by the government of a state, by a market, or by a network over a social. It's a long one, this one. But basically, it's all the ways that laws, rules, norms come together to shape how decision making happens. It's a lot. It's very complex, as I think I'm going to try and demonstrate in this next slide. This is from my master's, trying to sum up global governance in a very simplified manner. I wish it were this simple, but we've got governments, we've got businesses, we've got society, we've got NGOs. These are all feeding in, and there's a role for young people in each of these. It's just we need to work out how we can get young people involved. Like I said, this is very simplified. Please don't leave and think this is actually how global governance works. As an example from Wales, if anyone's heard of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, this is a more realistic of how it all works and how you feed in, and it's very complicated. This is just one act from Wales, so it gives you sort of an indication of how bureaucratic these systems can be and how difficult it can be to get into conservation, into policy making, into I'm talking here about the environment, but this applies to health, it applies to education. It's a very complex matter. But enough sort of boring. Actually, I've got one more boring slide. It's a glossary, because who doesn't love definitions? But in the sort of, everything that's going on at the moment, we're hearing a lot of these terms just thrown around, sort of empowerment, engagement, inclusion, involvement, and participation. But to me, at least, they mean quite different things, and I think it's very clear that we know when something's about youth inclusion, how is that different from youth participation? And it is quite a big difference. To me, inclusion, means like you may get a seat at the table, whereas participation means you'll have a seat at the table and you're allowed to, speak your voice. And not to say that inclusion is a bad thing, but it's just a very different outcome to what participation is. And I think very often companies will throw these words out, we're working on an inclusion program, but does that give people a chance to actually feed in to the process? Not always, and that is something really important to consider. Involvement I use as kind of like a catch-all, just to be like, youth involvement, but just when you're, I want you to leave this session, when you're leaving and you go to a new company or go to a new NGO, look at the language they're using, because it's quite often indicative of what the aims are. And like I said, inclusion's not a bad thing, it's just very different to participation, which I think people should be more aware of. And a little bit, more theory. somebody called Roger Hart, for anybody who loves a paper, in 1997 created what we call the ladder of youth participation. And as you can see, it goes on the right-hand side. Those bottom ones are words we've probably all heard, and that's really, you know, tokenism. But even below tokenism, you've got manipulation, which is basically a company will hold an event and they'll invite young people. They won't tell them what the event is, but because young people are there, it's kind of got the youth vote, it's got the youth seal, which is wrong, but you know, it does happen. And decoration is they may know what's happening, but they are just there to, you know, they may give an opening keynote, but they don't actually speak in, you know, don't actually participate. And then as we go further up, you know, obviously we get into sort of assigned but informed. You know, they're told you will be doing this, but at least they are informed. Consulted is, you know, what should we do, but still you're going to be doing this. And you go further up, and then eventually you get to things which are like a youth initiated and directed. So these, you know, this panel today organised by Chester Zoo Youth Board is youth initiated. All, you know, Felix and the team have been working hard to get this done, and then they've also had support then from adults around them to get it done. But the ideas come from young people, which is a really key aspect to getting young people involved. You know, if they can't get the skills they need today, you know, everyone likes to say youth are the future, but if you can't get those skills today, then what happens when we do become the leaders? So I think it's really important that these sort of things go on. And actually I have got a very quick challenge. I know people hate challenges, but what I want you to think about, talk to your neighbour whilst I have a glass of water. Why, if you were to go into a company that hasn't really engaged with youth in the past, how would you sort of sell it to them? How would you say young people need to be involved? My only caveat is you can't use youth are the future, because I think that's quite often used as sort of like a catch-all, everyone hears it, but I think it's really important that we actually engage with the actual skills that young people have. You know, things like social media. It sounds trivial, but young people are very good at social media, good at networking. We've just left education, so we've got a really like solid group of people to talk to. So have a, you know, a little chat, just have a think about anything that you would say to an NGO, to a company, about why they should engage with young people. I just, whilst I have a glass of water, really, so have a think. I was like, I hope you're all talking about it because it's very lively. Or if you were talking about like pastries at 10 o'clock, then I also understand. I was trying to listen in to some of the conversations, you know, and you gentleman here at the very front has some excellent ideas about, you know, we always say youth are the future, but what are those actual tangible things that youth bring to the table that perhaps other generations don't? So I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing any sort of ideas that you were...
Like, we've grown up seeing the effects of climate change, and we feel that we've caused it instead of like a person that was born like 50 years ago who contributed to it. Through the use of social media, we can spread the message out to more people, and that will affect more people, like a ripple effect.
Yeah, it's things like that, you know. It goes beyond just saying youth of the future. It's actually like, why can we you know, why can we start change? How can we initiate change? And then, you know, it's like the theory of it is if you rely solely on that sort of symbolic power, it can run out. Whereas if you go to the table and say, well, these are our ideas, this is what I bring to the table, you're more likely to be treated as an equal. And it's like, hopefully then, I mean, there's, as we'll go through, there's other issues, but at least if you go with ideas, it doesn't run out. You don't run out when you're like, well, I'm young people, I deserve to be here. You go and say, look, I'm young, I deserve to be here, but also I'm much better at social media than you are. I'm much better at this. I can do this. I can network. I've just left school, so I've got a really solid group of friends that I can share with. Things like that sound kind of trivial, but they're actually what make young people so powerful. And it's, when you think about it, it's really handy. You know, I would quite often get thrown the question, well, why is youth important? And if you have those answers, you're not caught off guard, and I think that's really crucial moving forward. But you know, you've managed to get this to this point, but then we also need to address the sort of barriers to youth participation. There's a lot. I've tried to summarize some of them. You know, we've got things like adultism, which is just that inherent bias towards adults, or discrimination against young people. It's also related to a thing called adult centrism, which is that adult views are more important. It doesn't necessarily mean adult views are good or bad. It just means they're more important because they are today's leaders. And there's lots of examples of this around the world where as you'll see as we go through, this is kind of what brings the rest of them together, is this view that adults know what they're doing. I know because I'm older, basically. It also then creates these stereotypes that young people are inherently lazy or uneducated. Apathetic is the one I always get. Well, they're like, well, young people don't care. But I know you look at it, and young people aren't going out to vote as much as other people, but it's maybe they're disenchanted with the current system. They don't feel they're being listened to. So these stereotypes just get painted out there with no qualifications, which is just really terrible. And then also, we can't ignore the fact of patronising statements, which can also be very, very positive. I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago where this gentleman told me he was very impressed that I put together a PowerPoint. And I was like, I've just finished my master's, I can put together a PowerPoint. But it goes against, like, he was trying to be very friendly, but it created a very uneasy atmosphere. And I think it shows that sort of gap in communication between generations, because he was like, oh, I was just trying to be nice. But I was like, it just made me feel like, I can put together a PowerPoint. Like, we are taught that in school now, and that's, again, it goes back to those skills that young people can bring. But then also we've got the very famous sort of dismissive comments, such as former President Donald Trump, which I still find hard to say. That he was ever an active president, not these former. Sort of this with Greta saying that she needs anger management and go to a good old movie with a friend, and it links back to these stereotypes, and it's all very pervasive. So it's something we need to address. It also then leads on to these sort of cultures of power. I don't know if anybody here has been able to sit into some like ministerial meetings with the government and stuff. They're a bureaucratic nightmare. You have to wait for which is fine, you have to wait for your turn to speak, but then if you're not given the right accreditation, you can't speak, and then you just have to listen. And these cultures of power do exist within government, within companies, within the UN. That's the headquarters in Geneva. They're very ingrained in the way they work, and it's very difficult for newcomers to get involved in any sort of meaningful way. We may be invited to sit there, but we're not invited to vote, we're not invited to participate, and there's things like that also need addressing. They also need addressing because I think it's so bureaucratic that I think it's one of the downfalls of why environmental policy isn't working, because each department has its own initiatives, each department has its own goals, but that's a different conversation for another day. Lack of experience, and this is one that I do genuinely believe, because like going back, young people, we haven't had a chance to get into these fields, into these places, and when we do get there, they're not exactly the most welcoming of places. I was in a meeting the other day, and because I didn't have the right name, the right company name, they kicked me out of the meeting, and then I had to email being like, no, I am supposed to be here, I just didn't put the right name. And it's things like that are very unwelcoming. And then the final one is time preference. We always prioritise today over the future, and I think that's another reason that youth aren't involved. It goes back to the whole youth of the future, but because we prioritise present, it's why you'll wait your turn. It's going to happen. You'll be the leader of tomorrow. But I'm like, well, we need to get involved today, so there's some sort of continuity. And then some more very logistical ones. Meeting times. They say we want to engage youth, but then they do the meetings at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, and all youth are in school or university. And again, that sounds like a really trivial thing, but if youth can't engage that way, then and quite often they don't make accommodations for that, or they don't make considerations. They just say, well, we tried to engage youth, but none turned up to our meeting on Tuesday morning, whilst everyone's in school. So it's things like that. Funding is a big one. As I'm sure most people know, NGOs and stuff, funding is always the enemy. Especially when it's everyone's it puts you in a very strange place to battle to get funding, even though we're all fighting the same game. And then the final one is there such a thing as a homogenous youth? We paint all young people as just youth, but we can't ignore the intersections with all the other racial, gender, sexual orientation. They all feed into this. Language is a big one. If English is the sort of lingua franca of the world, but if you don't speak English confidently, then you're not often invited, or because they don't want to get extra interpreters. So there's things like that we can't just treat youth as homogenous. I probably will in this talk just to save time, but that's always in the back. We've got to be in the back of our minds. Is these issues will affect different young people to different degrees, and we have to be aware of that. Also, red flags. Everyone loves seeing the red flags at the moment. I was going to play a bit of a game, but I don't think we will. I was going to do the TikTok when put a finger down if you, but we're not. But these are just some things take these with a pinch of salt. They're not always bad. It's when they're kind of unqualified that I think they're bad. Again, youth are the leaders of tomorrow. But if that's just met with a blank statement, what does that mean? The position is unfunded, but this will be great for your CV. Not all young people can afford to do unfunded positions, and although I know they can't afford to pay everybody, it's important to have those conversations. And is there any funding, or can you at least reimburse travel, or can you at least reimburse accommodation? That's a big barrier. An overly positive compliment, there's my PowerPoint story, because that's going to stick with me for a while. A dismissive comment, you know how those feel. Meetings taking place with no consideration. I quite often get, we've tried engaging with youth, but they're not interested. And then you ask them, and they're like, oh, what did you do? And they're like, we sent out one survey on a Friday night, and no one filled it in by Monday morning, so we've decided they're not interested. And would anybody really fill in a survey on a Friday night, sort of any age? So things like that are also things to look out for. Let's keep this conversation going, followed by no attempt to continue the conversation. That's quite often happens. Youth being the last invited to speak. And then, asking you, have you ever felt manipulated into a position? Have you ever felt sort of, I didn't have a choice, but I had to stand on the stage and sort of be the youth person there? Because that happens a lot. And felt unsure or welcome in a meeting. I can share this, but this is kind of like guidelines, I would say, if you're going to talk to a company or an NGO about why they want to engage youth. I think everybody rushes into the how do we engage youth, but I think it's really important to take a step back and say, why are we engaging with youth? Because that helps shape your plan then. A lot of people come to Reserva and say, how do you engage youth? But their plans may be different. So it's more they need to take a step and go, why? Are youth going to be treated as equals? Are they going to be given voting rights, or are they just going to be there to sit and listen? Which both are fine, but it needs to be clear from the outset what's happening. But yeah, now I guess I'm going to talk more about Reserva and what we do, and then hopefully wrap it up, and it'd be great to have any questions. And I know there's some other great youth organisations here, so they'd be great to hear their answers as well. So a little bit about Reserva. We empower young people to make a measurable difference for threatened species and habitats through conservation, education and storytelling. Our flagship project, which we've actually just completed, was to create the world's first entirely youth-funded nature reserve in Ecuador, right up here in northern Ecuador, right on the border with Colombia, in partnership with Rainforest Trust and Fundación Ecominga. And if you don't follow us on Instagram, do, because we'll be announcing very soon the sort of formal protection of this area. And it would be great to have everyone on board to promote the word. But more about the site, just because I know you're all nature lovers, and I couldn't skip without showing you some nature. Don't ask me the species. I was telling everyone I'm a marine person, so I know the sea, but I don't know the land. But I do know this is called Rabo columbi, because it's the angriest looking toad I've ever seen, and that one sticks in my head all the time. But we've got, there's spiron-headed spider monkeys. Orchids are actually the most important ones on our site. That's what Dracula Reserve is named after, is a species of orchid. And that frog in the bottom corner, or toad, I never quite remember, is only the size of your fingernail, but it's critically endangered and is only found on 2 sites, and they're both within our nature reserve. So that is what, that's why we had to protect it. There's all of this, but this is only found in 2 sites, and they only know of, I think, 4 individuals of this species, which is insane. But if you're interested, I think it's on a coming slide, we actually got to name the new species. So all these photos were taken by our founder, Callie Broadus, who is a photographer. I'm not this talented. You'd probably get some blurry images on an iPhone with me. This is the world's cutest snake. And as we'll come to, we're all about community engagement. And I think snakes, I'll personally be honest, I used to be terrified of snakes. Don't know why, but it's about showing people that snakes, aren't horrible. And it's the same thing for me. It's sharks. Sharks are presented as these evil killers, but it's about engaging with the community. Say, I think you're more likely to be killed by a cow than a shark, and it's things like that. And it's, but it's about showing. This is just adorable. I can help. Just note that all of these pictures were taken with herpetologists. We weren't just going in and yanking out snakes willy-nilly. So these are the sort of the plant life is famous for. This one glows in the dark somehow, which is amazing. We've got a mycologist on our team, and he was almost cried when he saw this. So that was lovely. For the bird lovers in here, they are incredible. The one on the far right sings a beautiful song.
Again, I don't know the species.
I think that's a cock of the rock.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that is the name. I remembered it. I knew it had a funny name. We've got moor toads, but also, it's beautiful. But we also have to remember that it is a very threatened land. This is a naranjia crop, which is it's a very low money crop, which means they have to plant a lot of it to make money. And one of our missions is to sort of work with communities to get them, sustainable livelihoods away from this crop, which is just devastating. Getting them high money crops that only take up a small amount of land, but they get huge profits. But the biggest threat we're currently facing is mining. This was a pristine gorge, which was probably home to more unknown species. We discover species every day, but a big international mining company has gone in and decimated this gorge. So we're currently gearing up for a legal battle. So as well, follow us on Instagram, because it would be great to have support on that, because obviously these companies are powerful. Just more pictures of our team on the ground, working with local and Indigenous communities. These are really like the backbone of the protection. They're the ones out there putting their lives on the line in many cases, and we owe them a big debt of gratitude. They're incredible. And then more about youth. This team was our expedition team, and I think bar 3 people, everybody here is under 30, and they were actually the ones doing the science, going out and sampling. So it's another case of, this may not be governance, but it's an example of getting youth involved on the ground in the actions, taking part, doing the samples, and that's something as well. It's about participation at the end of the day. It's all not just governance, it's in conservation, it's in all of these. How do we actually get young people involved? What else have we got? Okay, the community, showing them there's a big fear of snakes in the community because there are some very venomous snakes around. So it's about engaging with them and showing, not all snakes are bad. This is what I wanted to show you. This was our making science and discovery accessible. So the one that I was saying at the very beginning, it's also this one. It does look a bit different in this picture. We actually had a naming contest, a global naming contest, where we just said, young people, send us in ideas for names. And so the new species was actually named by a 19-year-old from Ecuador, Hylocertus conscientia, based on sort of Latin of being like conscious and hopeful and things. And if you want to read the paper, it is available on PJ. It's a great, very interesting paper. Million Letters campaign, COP has just ended. This is one of our bigger projects, was to get these letters from global young people up to COP, hand them out to ministers. I was telling someone a story earlier about handing a letter to Sylvia Earle, who's one of my all-time idols, and I forgot how to speak English, and I panicked, got a picture and ran. But I did hand her a pack of letters in the meantime, so she hopefully will be reading them, and maybe I'll get a mention in her next book, maybe. But yeah, kind of, the nitty-gritty of it, how do we actually start the youth-led organisation, is difficult. On this slide, we'll show that starting an organisation is not always the answer. If there's an existing organisation doing the work, you may be better placed supporting them and providing your expertise to them. I think everyone gets sort of the dream of starting your own organisation, but in many cases, if you can support an existing organisation, that's equally as valid and equally great. We quite often, people just want to do this and go straight to that, but there's a whole process to becoming like a charity or becoming a company. It's a big task, and I think it's really important that people take a step back and say, what's the best route? But for us to engage youth, we are completely youth-led. This is we'll love a chart. We love Lucidchart. We're completely youth-led. Our executive director is 29. All of our youth council are under 26. Our board of directors, which I'll come to on this next slide, I think 50% are under 25. So it's about getting young people into those decision making. It's not just on the sideline as members. They are actually there. Equal voting rights. On the youth council, it's all youth. So there's no input from anywhere else. But we break it into conservation, which is what you've just seen the lovely pictures of. The education, which is the going into schools, and then storytelling, which is the letters. But this is our board of directors. We've actually written, some of you may know Lizzie, she was here yesterday, I think. She's on the board of directors. Bella Lack, probably some of you have heard her. It's actually written into our bylaws that young people have to constitute between 30 and 50% of the board. which not many other organisations have, and it means going forward we have to stick to that. We have to have young people on the board, and this, at the end of the day, board of directors are what make the sort of strategic decisions. So it's important that youth are in those places. Here's our youth council. I'm here. I must have been eating or something. I haven't got my camera on. But yeah, all under the age of 26, which again is revolutionary in the way that this is just youth-led, and we've actually managed to accomplish actual tangible conservation goals, which shows that young people should be in these places doing these things. We're a good-looking bunch, I have to say. It's broken down into committees. My committee is the one in the light blue, the conventions committee, so I sort of work with policy and get to go to all those boring meetings. It's not the most glamorous. I'd much rather be on media doing the pictures, but again, young people have the ability, and this means that we can go to these meetings and say, hey look, we ran the conservation, we did it. This shows that we've got goals. We built a network from nothing. We built a social media following. We built them. These goes back to those concrete skills that young people have and should make use of, and that's why I'm a little bit reluctant to always rely on the youth of the future argument, when I think there are solid things that young people can do and bring to any team. It's really important to have partners who believe in youth. Example probably here with the Chester Zoo Youth Board. Chester Zoo itself is supportive. I'm sure there's lots of other examples of youth organisations being well supported by other organisations. And I just wanted to share this video from our partner, Javier, who he's normally not very serious, but in this video he gets quite emotional. So apologies for that.
Javier Roballo. I'm working in a community foundation, and I'm in charge of the Reserva project and Dracula Reserve. One of the new projects that we have is to involve young people, considering that the next generation needs to be involved from the very beginning of these type of projects to have a long-term impact. We cannot transmit ideas and knowledge and concepts if we are working alone. We need to work with all the different partners that we have, and young people, it's in a different stage. They are not waiting. They are taking actions, and this is the moment, and this is a place to have young people that wants to be scientists, young people that wants to make their own uniform, people that her voice has to be felt outside. We cannot go to big meetings and say that we want to involve young people if we don't give the chance. Now is the moment. We don't have time to make mistakes, and young people will provide us 20 years more of actions. And next generation need to be in charge to the next generation also. That's the moment.
He's probably summed it up better than I have in 30 minutes in those 2 minutes. So that's Javier, and he's normally a very jokey man, but he's very passionate about youth involvement and youth participation in everything, and I think it's really important to find those people. They do exist. It's just getting their support is so important. We have an extended video where he does actually start crying, but we've cut that because he asked us to. But yeah, that's pretty much me done. Please do reach out to me on anything that you need, or reach out to Callie. Actually, she's probably the best point of contact, but you're more than happy to. Mine is just joe@reserva.ylt if you want to reach out by email. Get involved in our Million Letters campaign. If anyone's got some time and wants to write a letter about why they love nature, we have a plan to take them to COP15, which is the biodiversity one happening in China. If you want to get your letters heard there, then feel free to write and we can sort that out. And also just engage with us on social media, because we have got some big announcements coming, and the more people supporting it, it makes it harder for the mining companies to fight if we've got an international audience supporting us. And yeah, feel free to ask me anything, or I hope I didn't bore you all to sleep, and I hope you're all awake.